Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Data Scientist Podcast. I'm very happy to be here today with Ethan Decker, who is a brand specialist, brand expert, and the president of Brand Science. So I'm looking forward to a very interesting conversation with Ethan, who's managed to take what might seem a very soft topic and has turned it into a real science. Ethan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Studios.
Would you like to share a few words about your experience and your journey, which is actually quite unique and impressive? Because if I'm not mistaken, you started from hard sciences and now you're working on something which, at least on the surface, looks quite different.
Correct. I started as a PhD in computational ecosystem analysis. I was a biologist. I studied ecosystems. In a weird way, I studied urban ecosystems, and my approach was large data sets and computational analysis to look at patterns, flow of energy and materials, and things like that. So that was, yeah, my stint in hard sciences. Or at least physical sciences, let's call them, because then I completely jumped tracks. I became a journalist and ran a little small magazine. From there, I got into market research, did global qualitative market research, traveling the world, going into people's homes and talking to them about their lives and their products. And from there, I got into marketing and advertising as a brand strategist. So I spent 20 years essentially in the advertising industry doing brand strategy and marketing strategy for mostly large companies, Procter and Gamble, Kellogg, PepsiCo, Nike, Domino's, folks like that, but also for smaller brands. And then, as you mentioned, I've done a weird thing in the world of advertising, which is to look for the laws of advertising, to look for the science of marketing. Because a lot of folks in advertising and marketing, either they think it's all an art, or they're just not really aware that there are scientific laws. And when they look at the, data marketing science, really what they're thinking about is big data analysis and number crunching, but not looking for things like the laws of gravity or the laws of physics or the laws of entropy. So I did some digging and found out that there are indeed laws about how marketing works and advertising work and shoppers work.
Okay, that's fascinating. So I guess this is where the science comes into play, right? So what would be some of those laws? Is it, I don't know, is it more like 10 laws or is it like two or three laws? How complex are these statements?
At the moment, and the science is about 30 to 50 years old, depending on where you start counting, which is not very long for science. But you could say there are two or three core laws, but each one also has a lot of other corollaries. So you could say that there are 10 or 20 things that really sophisticated marketers keep in mind. One of them, for instance, is that for almost every brand, and when I say brand, I mean company, for almost every company, they have what's called a negative binomial distribution of buyers, an NBD. That's a fancy word and or a phrase. And the way it really looks is it's like a banana. So it does. There's my friend Weimer Schneiders who calls it a banana curve now. And truly, we think of the bell curve, and we all have a visual for what the bell curve is, where there's a middle and then it slopes off on both sides. The banana curve starts really high and then slopes down, kind of like a ski slope or a ramp. And almost every brand, unless you just have one customer, like the Department of Defense, has lots and lots of people who buy you once, and then a few people that buy you twice, and then even fewer people that buy you three times, and then down and down and down. Sometimes these are also called long tail distributions, but there are lots of different scientific ways to describe them. The negative binomial is the one that seems to describe buyer frequency the best. And you'll talk to a brand that thinks they have passionate, fanatical buyers. Like I was working with a small beverage brand in the kind of non-alcoholic space, and they believed they had incredible loyalty and super passionate fans because that's who would speak up in social media and that's who would write back to them and that's whose orders they could see over and over and over. But then I looked at their data and I showed them their data and I said, sure enough, the most common order size is one case, and people never come back and buy another. And that was shocking to them because they thought they had these fanatical fans and these loyal buyers. But in fact, they followed the natural law just like every other brand on the planet.
That's very interesting because I'm, amongst other things, a statistician as well. So I'm a big fan of these types of observations, being able to place a probability distribution in particular phenomenon and say, look, this is a bell curve, this is a power law, this is Pareto, this is whatever. I guess the binomial distribution makes perfect sense because usually there's a peak on the value of one or two because
Correct.
it's a distribution of integers, and then there's the long tail, right? So it kind of makes a very it makes a lot of sense. It's not a distribution that you encounter that often. It's
No.
fascinating to hear it's applied in this particular case.
Yeah, and it shows up over and over in the world of commerce. For instance, um, it's very rare for people to just buy one brand of anything, really, especially in countries where there's millions of brands like America.
Mm.
So, for instance, even if you buy toilet paper all the time, most households buy two or three different brands of toilet paper, and they just change which one they pick up at any given moment, depending upon where they're shopping or where there's a sale. Um, some households buy five or six or seven brands. Some households just buy one brand. There are a couple of households that buy zero because they probably have bidets. But that's also a negative binomial distribution of what's called the repertoire size, the repertoire of brands people buy. Another good example is look in your closet at the shoes you wear. How many different brands of shoes do you own? And some people own two or three brands of shoes, and they always buy Nikes for running, let's say. But some people have 10 or 20 different brands of shoes. And so it's a statistical regularity that is like a law. It's a law-like behavior. And a lot of people in marketing and advertising just have no clue that there are these statistical regularities that are law-like.
That's very interesting. And what would be some other laws of similar nature?
Sure. Another one is that the larger the brand, the more customers you have, and the more frequently they buy you. This is called the law of double jeopardy. And this is a pattern that you can actually model numerically and then predict based on just a couple of variables of a category. So, for instance, a large brand like Coca-Cola has more buyers than smaller brands, and those buyers buy them more frequently. So the average purchase frequency is higher. We call that loyalty sometimes. I hate the word loyalty. It's a sloppy word. It's an emotional word. It's just not very good. So, but what you see is an incredibly tight correlation between the market share, the household penetration, and the purchase frequency of brands. So small brands suffer because they have low market share. They also have low penetration, so not many buyers, and they have low average purchase frequency. So those buyers don't buy them very frequently. That law is so consistent. It's pretty much universal. And again, it flies in the face of an assumption that you can be a small brand with loyal customers that are way loyal than the big brand, much more loyal. So you believe that you have some small cola that people just love and they buy it all the time and they hate Coca-Cola and they only buy you and they buy you a lot. And the data show over and over and over and over that just doesn't seem to happen.
Okay, that's very interesting. And so, how would a company, especially a small company that's competing in a red ocean of all sorts of competitors, big and small, old and new, how can they use some of these findings in order to make a name for themselves, right? And what does this have to do with building a brand using those principles?
If you're a small brand, it's tempting to believe all you need is 1,000 fans. There's even a phrase about this right now. 1,000 true fans or true customers. It's popular these days. It's tempting to believe that it's better and more important to keep a customer than acquire a new one. And that's another fallacy. That was a back of the napkin calculation someone made that it must be more expensive to acquire a customer than to retain one. But it's actually often not true. It's because retaining a customer is often reacquisition because they've already forgotten about you. They tried you once, they go back to their old brand, and now you have to reacquire them, even though it looks like it's retaining a current customer. So if you're a small brand, first of all, if you understand these laws, it means you don't chase after fantasies of being a small brand with crazy loyal customers. You realize that you're constrained by the same laws of physics, so to speak, as big brands, and you need to get more customers. So you focus on acquisition. Customer acquisition in the early days is incredibly important. So you need to get new customers. I was working with a grocery brand recently, and they had been thinking about loyalty in the wrong way. And once they switched gears and really decided, we're just going to go after new customers, we're going to make sure our product is good enough that people want to buy it again, but our focus is going to be on customer acquisition, they blew up. And now they're a multi-hundred-million-dollar brand, and they're not even in grocery stores yet. So, number one, that would be an example of a small brand understanding the laws, or at least one law, and then deciding to design marketing efforts around that law that are fruitful instead of stupid.
Okay, very interesting. And do you find that these laws they're the same across industries? As you know, a large part of our audience is in technology, and they're interested in things like AI, blockchain, Web3. I personally find the Web3 space a bit peculiar, with all these focusing narratives and crazy anonymous people and NFTs. Would you find that these laws like kind of apply everywhere, or there might be certain industries which, for whatever reason, maybe because they're really new or they're nascent, or because they are small or whatever, maybe some of these laws don't apply as much as you'd expect in retail, for example.
Yeah, I think a good way to think about it is the laws of gravity still apply on Mars and Jupiter, but the parameters are different, or other factors are different. So, for instance, you go to the moon, and the moon is small, so suddenly we're bouncing around instead of walking normally. It's not that the law of gravity doesn't apply, it's that the parameters are different because the moon is a small thing. Or you go to Jupiter and it's massive, and so you can't even walk because you're pinned to the ground because you are so heavy. But again, the law of gravity still works. It's just the parameters are different. Or um, Mars doesn't have an atmosphere, nor does the moon. So if you're on the moon, you can't fly a paper plane. A paper airplane does not fly on the moon because there's no air for it to glide on top of. So it doesn't mean that the law of gravity doesn't apply on the moon. It just means that other things are at play. And that seems to be what we find when we look across different categories, whether it's technology, whether it's e-commerce versus brick and mortar, whether it's B2B versus B2C. The laws seem to apply over and over and over, but the parameters are a little bit different.
Okay, so what would be some of the parameters that are different in, let's say, tech startups, for example?
So for a tech startup, one of the parameters might be that um, in B2B, purchase cycles are incredibly long,
Mm,
usually compared to B2C. I mean, people buy coffee almost every day,
yeah.
for instance. And so you might have to put out some marketing that will plant a seed in someone's mind, and then they
Hmm.
won't make a purchase decision for over a year.
Yeah.
Salesforce said recently that their average purchase cycle time is 400 days. It
Whoa.
takes over a year for them to close a sale. Um, and that's average. So there's some that last even longer. So that's one of the parameters in B2B is that the purchase cycle might be so long and the buying cycle might be so long that you need to really understand you're going to have to stretch things out really far. Here's one example.
Interesting. And how do you think AI is affecting all that? Do you think it makes it easier to build a brand if you're a small business? Do you think it's more useful for bigger businesses? Do you think is changing any of those parameters? Yeah.
Yeah, I think AI is currently an incredible new tool. It's kind of like desktop publishing, which made
Hmm.
publishing anything possible for anybody. A
Hmm.
home printer and a desktop computer. A lot of people don't remember before then, you had to get a company that knew how to choose typefaces
Mm.
and set those typefaces and choose the size, the font size as well, and do typesetting. And I mean, back when I was in college, I was printing out copy for the newspaper and gluing it to whatever they were called, broadsheets or whatnot, to print newsprint. And now you can do that all on a computer at home, and you don't need that whole staff and the decades of
Hmm.
expertise and the typesetting. So AI is going to become an incredible tool. It already is for people to do lots of thinking tasks and analysis tasks that used to be very labor intensive. So that'll be a change. I think further down the road, when AI, if or when AI becomes more of an agent, more of sentient is maybe too strong of a term, then it'll be interesting when AI can make decisions for itself, so to speak, and we have to argue with AI and control what AI chooses to do and not do.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think what's very interesting is it's developing so rapidly. Like I was looking into DeepSeek, like everyone these days. For example, I mean, code is one thing, right? So, but in terms of, let's say, marketing related activities like social media and things like that, it's very easy to see these days whether a post on social media has been generated by ChatGPT, but I expect at some point in the near future, um, a new generation of large language models will enable anyone to create a lot of content, and the content is most likely going to be sophisticated. It will look like unique, and so on and so forth. And obviously, this raises a lot of questions, as in, where's the authenticity in all that,
Hmm.
right? Is this, if someone's like can just generate hundreds of posts, and obviously, whatever a company or individual put out
Yeah.
on social media, I guess it's a building block in terms of their brand and the message and everything, right?
Yeah.
So,
AI is a transformational technology for things
mhm,
that are not bits and bytes. I mean, that are bits and bytes and they're not atoms and molecules for now.
mhm,
So if it's thinking, if it's analysis, it is incredibly useful. For instance, I've used AI to analyze qualitative data. Survey data. You can
mhm,
analyze quantitative survey data with a basic stats program like Excel. But to
mhm,
analyze open-ended qualitative survey data, you can now use software like ChatGPT,
mhm,
and it does a pretty good job, which is great. So 80% of the way there, that's more than most people if you're starting at 0% of the way there.
mhm.
So even if it's not perfect, it's pretty transformational to be able to do that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm an AI engineer amongst other things. I'm still getting amazed at the pace of progress in this area. But anyway, yeah, I guess a couple of last questions before we wrap up. One is, first of all, where can our audience find more about you, like website, LinkedIn? What's the best place to go?
My website is appliedbrandscience.com.
Hmm.
I've got a blog there. I post weekly on topics related to brand marketing and marketing strategy, things like that, and more information about my services for training or
Hmm.
for helping you build your brand and building your marketing strategy. I post fairly regularly on LinkedIn, and
Mm.
there it's my handle is Decker.
Hmm.
Or you can also find Applied Brand Science there, but I post mostly as E.H. Decker, and there's a healthy conversation over there with people who like to talk about the same topics. So those are the two best ways to get a hold of me.
Yeah, that's perfect. And yeah, before we wrap up, I guess I have one question. So, if someone's an individual, an entrepreneur, small business, like many of the people listening to this podcast, what should they focus on when building the brand? If they had to focus on a couple of small things, whether it's one of the laws you mentioned or something else. So, someone is like, you know what, I'm going to start today. I'll take a small action. And I know this is gonna get me closer towards my goal. What would that be?
Well, when we talk about brand, we just have to be really clear. Are we talking about what I like to say big B brand, which is your whole company, your
Mm,
offering, your product, your service, everything? Or are we
mm,
talking about your little b brand, which is your logo, your color, the
mm.
font you use? And so people confuse those all the time, which is that's fine. They're just it's like the word love. It means a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But um, but when it comes to technology startups or small technology companies, I think first of all, you need to focus on your big B brand, your whole offering.
Mm,
Is the product good? Is the
mm,
service good? Is is the customer service good? So that all matters. Absolutely. Product, product, product. A lot of technology
mm,
companies always, they pour all their money into R&D and product, which is
mm.
great. But it is not true that if you build it, they will come. That's a common phrase,
Yeah.
right? If you build it, they will come. Build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. That's not true. You do need to promote it. You need to popularize it, and you need to let people know you exist at all because there are
Mhm,
30 other brands just like yours now offering the same service. Or you think
mhm,
it's different, but nobody else can tell the difference. And for that purpose, you do need to think about your little b brand, your color, your logo, your catchphrase, your cute animal mascot.
mhm.
And technology companies don't think they need a cute mascot, but oh my God, they really do. Salesforce,
Okay.
Salesforce has an incredible mascot named Astro, and it has helped their
Okay.
business incredibly to have a cute, cuddly mascot on what otherwise is a nameless, faceless, dry technology.
Okay.
So,
That's
so
interesting.
you know why? Because you're not selling to computers, you're selling to humans. You're still selling to humans, even if they're business people.
That's a good point. Unless in a few years we have AI agents that sell to each other, but we're not there yet,
Yeah,
are we?
and that does happen like on the stock market, right? People buy and sell,
Yeah, yeah,
computers
yeah.
just buy and sell to each other all the time. But as long as you're dealing with a human, you have to understand what's happening between the ears. You have to
Yeah.
understand what's happening between the ears. And that's where cuddly characters help, that's where logos help,
Hmm.
that's where mascots and jingles and catchphrases, they're really important because they help people remember that you exist at all.
Hmm. Hmm. That's a very good point. I think that's a very good takeaway for today's episode. Well, thank you very much, Ethan.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thank you for staying here with us today. And we hope to see you again at some other of our episodes. Make sure to check our blog, thedatascientist.com, as well as the Tesseract Academy, Tesseract with double S dot academy, where you can learn more about our programs on AI, data science, and Web3 for senior professionals. Thank you and see you soon. How do I pause? I think you have to pause on your end. Wait, I can't hear you. You're mute.